his party is called Christian Union. It's very evangelical and Christian party. He will talk about the reformational thought on politics and society. He will deal with the reformed worldview in relationship with political and social sphere. He will do that in English, and about 45 minutes we will have a Q&A session. Okay? I hope you enjoy. Let's welcome Dr. Roel.
So, good evening, everyone. I first need a drink because I just come from the railway station. You know the picture of bewildered professor a bit, so I feel now like a bewildered professor, not knowing where I am, but I see you, so that I can do my task this evening. And yes, and who are you? Because they introduced me now, and you are students of Handong, different disciplines, perhaps. So what are the disciplines that I have before me now? Political science, economics, business administration, sociology, the kind of things. I see nodding. So, okay, you are a broad group, and you are also a student.
I'm a lifelong student.
Yeah. I too.
Occasionally attempt to be a professor.
Okay. In what subject?
Law. I teach in our U.S. and international law.
Okay, so there are also law students.
Yes.
Also philosophy, perhaps? Philosophy students? Yeah. But I feel at home because I heard there is a Hiddink soccer field. And Hiddink is a great coach also in the Netherlands. And I love soccer myself. Right, okay, I'm invited here. There's the coffee. Thank you. I'm invited here to talk about the influence of Reformational thought, or Calvinistic thought. In the Netherlands we are a Calvinistic country, or churches, or Protestant churches are very much influenced by the doctrines of John Calvin, 16th century. And in between we have had a lot of pastors and scholars, etc. And I want to introduce you a little bit to this stream of thought. And I hope you're not too unfamiliar with it, because I heard this Handong University is a Christian university. So many of you have, I think, a Presbyterian background or evangelical background, that kind of background. So hopefully what I'm going to say is not too far away from your own background. I was in Seoul. I go back to Seoul this evening. I'm speaking at Chongsin University, and that. What was amazing for me, that one of the names that was mentioned so often, was of Abram Kuyper. Well, I'm going to talk now about Abram Kuyper. I brought this book with me. Lectures on Calvinism, given in 1898 in the United States, Princeton. And what I just want to do is to introduce some key thoughts of this book. And I show you the title. It's available, and I would recommend it to you. So please.
It's also in the library.
Yeah, it's in the library, but hopefully it's also in your personal library. So if you have any money left, you can find it on the internet. It's really worthwhile. There are 6 lectures on Calvinism and politics, Calvinism and art, Calvinism and science, and even Calvinism and the future. So there is still a future to go, always. So Calvinism and the future. But one of the most important things that Kuyper did in this book, Abram Kuyper, he was a Dutch pastor, a Dutch scholar, a Dutch politician. He established a free university where I studied, and so many Dutch people studied, where that guy also studied, and Neglentica perhaps, well, he's been there. He knows the place. It's a university established by Abraham Kuyper. He also established a political party. Well, I'm member of parliament for a Christian political party, and I'm still in the heritage of Abraham Kuyper. So I would not be there in parliament without him, more than a century ago, and the inspiration that he offered for Christians to enter politics. To say, well, it's also for Christians a place to go, a place to witness, to be a witness of the gospel. And it's possible. Right? It's not impossible. It's possible to be in the political arena. If you don't mind, I try to manage something around my coffee here. A lot of milk. Okay, all right. One important thing that you must now know then about this approach of Abraham Kuyper about Calvinism is that he tries to explain in this book that Calvinism is not only a theology, it's not only a confession, it is a life system. That's his first point. That's the point he wants to make. It's a life system. And that means that it has a lot of things to say about all areas of life. So it's not only theology, it's not just a faith system, it's a life system. It helps us to orient in our society. It helps us to orient ourselves in our culture. And that was exactly the point he tried to make. And the inspiration he offered, that Calvinism as a life system helps us to orient in science, in art, in politics, everywhere. So that's the first thing that he wants to say. And his idea was that in modern society, modern culture, we have, as Christians and others also, we have a kind of spiritual battle to fight. There is a sort of spiritual battle between different life systems. Modernism is a life system, and it has a lot to say about all areas of life. And so you have several life systems. He also talked about Islam and others, and they all offer their own approach. They have their own interpretation of reality. And if we as Christians are not aware of our own interpretation of reality, we cannot fight this battle. We don't have the right weapons to enter this battle. Now, last days in Seoul, we say it in the right way, Seoul. It's not soul, the English soul that's in me. It's soul. Okay. We were talking about this thing that in Korea, Korea has a remarkable history. The fast growth of Christianity, and at the same time, all these different life systems around you. Buddhism, we see now on the street that Buddhism is alive here. They are preparing the birthday of Buddha. That's what we see here. Remarkable. Confucianism is still around, and somewhere deep down also shamanism. And so there are different life systems around here, and then there is secularism. I think what I witness here is you are a very, very modern society. It's amazing. You're a tiger. A tiger makes a quick jump in the future. So where in Europe some countries took 100 or 200 years to come somewhere, you did it in 10 or 20 years. That's my guess, that's my idea. All things are modern. Railway stations, the railway systems, the bridges, it's all new here. It's amazing. You have a lot of energy. And that's amazing to see. But it also means that modernism and so secularism can also come quickly here with all these modern ideas and modern attitudes. So there are different life systems around us. And I think it's good to think about a worldview approach. Right? The worldview approach that Abraham Kuyper tried to expose, and of course should be kept alive by us, should be renewed by us in every new generation, to give answers to the challenges of our time. I drink some coffee. The interesting thing of these lectures of Kuyper is, well, he gave them in 1898. That's what he said. And in that time, many Christians were impressed by a worldwide, let's say, global context, a sort of global struggle that was going on. And Abraham Kuyper feared that the end of history would be a struggle between the heathen East and the Christian West. That was his picture. He was thinking of Islam as a threat, but also about Asia as a threat. So the lectures, they end up with a sort of prediction that at the end of time there would be a great battle between the West and the rest. Like Samuel Huntington also said in his Clash of Civilizations, that idea of the West against the rest. Well, 100 years ago, Abraham Kuyper had the idea that Japan and China would become the enemies of Christianity. So the East, Asia, would be the enemy of Christianity. And he also had some criticism to the Christian church, that it did not enough about mission work. Right? The Dutch were present in Indonesia, and he accused the church that it did not enough for mission, right? to build Christian people. And so that was his picture, that Asia was a threat. Well, I think he was mistaken. Where was Korea at that moment? Well, I learned that Korea at that moment was 50 years before the Presbyterian missionaries came into Korea for the first time. People like Underwood and some others. That was in 1898, still not a Korean Bible. So they started with it. We are now celebrating the 100th anniversary of the assembly of the Presbyterian churches. So that goes back to 1913, I believe. Am I right with my all these numbers? So Korea was not on the map for Abraham Kuyper. But the missionary work in Korea has been amazing. So he couldn't foresee what would happen. So we can say now, with hindsight, looking back, that Abraham Kuyper was wrong. It was not Asia, which was heathen, which was influenced still by Buddhism and Confucianism only, but and not a clash between civilizations, but it's much more the picture of a clash within civilizations, also here in Asia. And Korea is an example of an Asian people, Asian country, that really adopted Christianity and underwent the influence of Christianity in a special way. So it's interesting that you have this Christian culture here in Korea. So Abraham Kuyper was wrong, but in another way, perhaps he was right. He was right in his expectation that when a new life system is adopted by people, things are going to happen. When a new life system is working through all relations and in the political and social sphere, new attitudes start, new expectations, new challenges, and new styles of life. And that's what I see here. Christians have had a remarkable influence on the culture and the achievements of Korea. So in a way he was right in saying that a worldview can be a driving force behind new developments. Now I want to highlight some of the characteristics of this Calvinistic worldview as Kuyper viewed it. And I want to concentrate on politics and society especially. And I want to mention three ideas that are important to understand the political and social approach of this Calvinistic worldview. The first characteristic is, I start then with a very Calvinistic idea, which is that Christians do have a deep respect for the sovereignty of God. So God is the sovereign one. He is the graceful and mighty master of the universe, and Jesus Christ is Lord and King in His name. So God is the sovereign one. And then I point at three consequences, three characteristics of this idea of God's sovereignty over us all. The first is, no power then on earth can be absolute and has to be bound by a larger conception of justice. So I repeat. The first is, no power on earth can be absolute and has to be bound by a larger conception of justice. I explain this later. So that's the first. The second central idea is human persons are called to serve one another as symbiotics. I explain this. So human persons are called to serve one another as symbiotics in a civil society. So again, human persons are called to serve one another as symbiotics, between brackets, in a civil society. And then the third idea is different social and moral practices, like an economic practice or an educational practice or a practice as a lawyer. Different social and moral practices need normative and responsible action. They require appropriate normative and responsible action. The different social and moral practices need appropriate normative and responsible action. These three ideas I want to illustrate, and so if you have any question, please interrupt. It's fine with me. If you have the need to ask something, please be clear. Okay, so the first idea, God is sovereign. What does this mean for all powers on earth? So the powers on earth are not absolute. Their sovereignty is relative. There are no absolute powers on earth. God and His reign is always paramount. And we all relate to Him as creatures that are established through His will. So if any power tries to interfere between God's human creatures and God, He is overstepping the limits. There are limits set for every power on earth. No power acts in its own right. All power is limited by nature. Because it may not hinder, and that's the reason, it may not hinder our relationship as individuals with God. No power can step in between our relationship as individuals to God. When free grace, this is a very important notion in Calvin, when free grace, the grace of God, is the most precious gift of God to man, there must be room between God and man that has to be respected by any power. And this is the basis of the freedom of conscience. And we are free to believe what we want. No power can dictate us what we have to believe. There must be freedom between the individual and God. And this freedom of conscience is, in a way, the mother of all freedoms. All constitutional freedoms, like the freedom of speech or freedom of association or whatever, has its root in this freedom of conscience. That's the free space between God and man to be respected, and no power to be allowed to interfere. So this is a very important line of thought, that the freedom of conscience is the basis of all constitutional freedoms that we have, because we respect the free room between the individual and God. So therefore all powers need to be limited and controlled. And this is essential in a fallen world. Also because citizens and governments, they can make mistakes and they need to be controlled. There need to be countervailing powers. But also authorities that safeguard the right order that should be kept. The right freedoms that should be respected. And this brings us back to the sovereignty of God. All authority is given by Him. It's enclosed in His word and His will. And all authorities on earth have to relate themselves to the will of God. This is the picture of Calvinism, about integrity and transparency of all powers that be. They have to view themselves as subordinate to God, bound by God's will. And this is also the foundation of the idea of the rule of law. Now I come to this larger conception of justice. All powers are subordinate to a larger justice that they have to obey. So the law is always above all powers. It's not powers that say what is right, but powers should be bound by a conception of justice. And these are, of course, important constitutional notions in a truly free and democratic society. And therefore, Ibn Kuyper was claiming that Calvinism was the root also of constitutional democracies. Because of this line of thought. Okay, so that was the first idea. The sovereignty of God limits powers here in order to make free space between the individual and God, and bind everything to a larger conception of justice. Now I come to my second point. The second point was about human persons that are called to serve one another in society. Okay, if the sovereignty of God is central, and this idea is central in Calvinism, we have to define ourselves as fellow servants. We may have different positions and different callings, but at the same time we are all servants trying to follow the will of the sovereign God. There's basically no difference in status or hierarchy. There's equality. In a radical sense, we are equal. So it's an important idea. I think also here in Korean or Chinese context with Confucianism around you, which has such a strong idea about social hierarchy, right? Higher and lower. But in Calvinism there is this idea of radical equality. Equality of the human individuals, but also of social structures. I will explain that